Oh, because for your crowd?
Well, for that, yeah, so they can kind of catch up. But we kind of got into chapter 12, but we're going to go back to the beginning. We only got like 10 verses deep. And it's a good thing that we're going to go back because there was a few things I read afterwards. I'm thinking we should have talked about that a little bit more. And so we're going to do that. So we mentioned, I think we talked about how in the beginning of chapter 12, we see that it says the Lord said to Abram, and all the order that came out of chaos, the overcoming of darkness by light, and all those various things happened because the Lord said. And so here we have this picture coming out of the garden and Noah and the flood episode, and then the Tower of Babel, where chaos continually tries to overtake the world again. We're in this, what I like to call a cosmic struggle between the chaos and order, and God has brought order to things, and there's this constant movement against God to reintroduce chaos into the world. So Adam and Eve tried, and he moved them out of the garden and put them in a place where they would have to really strive on their own to make sense of life. That there was going to be some chaos that came out of their sinfulness, but that they were going to be able to overcome it by the sweat of their brow, so to speak. And then we have the whole episode with Cain and Abel, and there's that again where both believing that what they are doing for God should be acceptable, but it's not, because one is out of really a sense of self-centeredness and even desperation, maybe, to live up to some ideal. And then, of course, Laban and their ancestors, and next thing we know, the whole world has fallen into this chaos. And so God deals with that chaos by allowing for that prehistoric glimpse of chaos to reoccur, where the waters are out of control. Everything that is considered to be the source of evil and turmoil overcomes the earth and destroys everyone but the righteous man Noah, who is walking with God. Here comes somebody. sound like my daughter. Okay, we're going to take a pause for a moment. Yeah. Yeah, because we started without you.
Recording and you had to pause it and come in and
there we go. That's our music.
Hey, did everybody take a prayer time to this morning?
Yes, and we got all the days filled up.
So the whole month of May or just the week?
Just the week. Yep.
Okay, we were talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't get to get back there, so I need my turn. But
you're free to pray though.
Oh, well, you know, I was going to take the thing though.
Awesome.
There's always next.
All right. So I'm carrying on while I'm on a roll. Oh, don't forget some of this stuff.
We're back in chapter 12 at the beginning.
Yeah, chapter 12 of Genesis. So, God, through the flood, uses chaos to deal with the chaos and the corruption of men. And so, they're showing off rings, by the way. And so Noah comes out of the thing unscathed. His sons come out, and of course the whole thing happens again in many form. And the writer of Genesis keeps giving us little bitty episodes that grow into huge episodes that have this huge effect. And so what we find in the Noah story is this overwhelming shame that is brought upon Ham for his laughter. Okay? He laughs at his father. And so in the process of this, something has to be done about the shame. And so we get a list of how the nations are brought about. After that is explained to us in chapter 11 with the Tower of Babel. So once again, God insist on people wondering. He set them off to wonder, but they don't wonder. They all gather up in Babylon.
They still disobey. And
They-
disobedient.
Yeah. So they gather up in Babylon, and here's the Tower of Babel, whose purpose is for them to make a name of themselves. So we find this track that is about to occur, where in Babel they were making a name for themselves, and we're going to find that God is about to be busy making a name for Himself. And in this attempt to make a name for themselves, God comes, the story of the Tower of Babel, and He scatters them, okay? And they occupy different parts of the world according to their tongue, basically, to what they speak. And out of this rises up worship of pagan gods, okay? Who has God revealed Himself to so far? In all of this episode, He's revealed Himself to the original Adam and Eve and that situation. He's revealed Himself to their offspring, and He's revealed Himself to Noah. And everyone else is not in tune with what God's plan is yet. Okay?
Do you think they were evangelizing though?
That they what?
Were evangelizing. I'm using that word, but
Well, I think the first time we see the idea of an evangelist is when Abram calls out to God at Bethel, and we begin to see that he's speaking of God. But so I don't want to get ahead, but
I was thinking about all those two
Yeah.
that came, and only those two did not.
Yeah. So in a sense, there was this chaotic moment because God said to scatter, they didn't. So He had to do it in a way that may or may not have created more hardship. The only thing that we have to know is that they've scattered into places with their own tribe or nation, which is determined by what they're speaking, the way that they're communicating to one another. And it's pretty obvious by the time we get to the story of Abram that paganism, some sort of worship of something higher than themselves, has come onto the scene. So we get to 12, and here we are, looking back to Genesis 1. God said, "Let there be," and there is. And then here He says, and God says to Abraham, "This is the way things are going to be now." Okay. So it says, the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Okay, we're going to just stop right there because there's an important thing that we didn't talk about the last time. I think that's important. It may not be important. But when we look at this, there are only two things that God says to Abraham to do. They're both stated in the imperative, I think. Harris has got his Hebrew Bible open, so he'll be able to tell us. But
Real words.
so he tells him to go from his land. I think that's stated in an imperative. All right, that's the one thing. And then the other thing He tells him to do is be a blessing. He says, "You will be a blessing." So these are the two things that Abraham's called upon to do.
Right.
And then in the middle of that, it says, so you go from what? Your relatives, your father's house, and you're going to a land. He knows nothing about where he's going. He just knows that he's leaving everything and he's going to this place that God's going to show him. So the reason why Abraham is the Genesis point of faith is because everything that he does is on his own foundation of faith. Yeah. There's no reason for him to believe any of this except that he has heard it. And so I begin to think about how that may have, how Abraham may have imagined that coming out of a pagan system. If it is Marduk, that the Tower of Babel, wrote on every brick the name of Marduk. So some of this stuff was coming about even at that time. What it must have been for Abram to hear this voice that says, "I'm going to do this for you if you do two things." And one of them involves a level of risk, but the other involves being something that you may have never imagined your life being, and that is a blessing. So you know you got to live somewhere. You know it's got to be somewhere that's going to be inhabitable. But did he ever think of the idea of I'm going to be a blessing? And I kind of think not, because I don't think we find that kind of thinking in the Gilgamesh story or any of the Egyptian. Of course not. That would have been a sign of weakness. So this is a whole new idea that is going on. So he's going to leave these things, and then he says, and I will make you into a great nation. So all these other nations that become great how? They've developed a language, they've developed a religion, they've developed might militarily, they've developed a way to exploit their neighbors, to steal and rob, all these different things that go on. That's what made a nation great. But here God is saying, I'm going to do it. Okay, so
Won't be that way.
that's right. It won't be that way. So the God said harkens us back to Genesis 1, where God said, let there be. So the same God that is speaking things into creation is also speaking into Abram that I'm going to make you a great nation. All right, so he was already part of a family and a part of a race that existed, but no mention of a nation. And he says, this is going to come about because of what I am going to do. And there's something that goes along with that. I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'm going to bless you. You're not going to have to bless yourself. You're not going to have to scratch and claw for your existence if you will just have faith in me. I'm going to bless you. Blessing means the same thing that it did in Genesis chapter 1 when God says to Adam and Eve, I will bless you, meaning I'm going to give you everything you need to live in my will. That was the idea. So now Abraham is in this place where I'm going to receive everything I need to live. That's the blessing. By this one who is going to make me into a great nation. I will make your name great. Okay, so here we find, as we move along, Abraham's name becomes identified with God's name.
Yeah,
all right?
The God of Abraham.
The God of Abraham. Mm-hmm. So before, the people at the Tower of Babylon were intent on making their own name great. So there was a definite idea that whatever was greater than them, they were going to usurp by building this tower into the heavens. But God says, I'm going to make your name great. Your name's going to be attached to mine and mine to yours. And you will be a blessing. The other imperative that we have. Okay? So that's pretty cool.
Can I throw something cool in there?
Yeah.
With that first imperative you're talking about, the go.
Yeah.
I believe it's here in one other place to Abraham where it's really hard to translate, but he uses like a literal where it would be go yourself. Like go according to yourself. It's just like a weird,
like a middle tense in the Greek.
Exactly. Like
yeah. You yourself are going to go.
Yeah. Like take yourself and go.
Yeah,
like,
take yourself and go. Pick up yourself.
Places in all scripture where it goes like that. Lech lecha. Lech lecha. Go. Pick up and go. Go.
So the idea there is not that God is that God is pushing him out the door. Mm-hmm. God has offered him this, and he's able to do it himself, and it's going to be under God's blessing. So we're still working within the relationship that we're able to have with God.
Which is kind of what he expects of us too.
Yeah.
We still have to work. It's not that we're working our salvation.
Right.
We should want to do what he's called.
That's right.
What he tells us to do for life and happiness.
Yeah. And so you get into this place, Abraham's the classic middle-aged guy. He's got to have something new. And in our culture, we would say, he's just looking to buy a Ferrari. Yeah. Just let him get it out of the system. But in this culture, it involves something terribly different. Because you didn't want to be pain-free and happy, which motivates us. You did want to be great. There was a greatness about life especially as a Bedouin wanderer.
To
Everywhere
have your
you
own
went, you
nation.
wanted your name to be great.
Yes, have your own nation of people
Yeah.
who know you,
Yeah.
what they strive for instead
Right.
of other.
So, yeah, maybe that's why it's so easy later for him to realize that he's not getting anything out of this, that the status of his name becomes the prime motivator. And we find that God has to make corrections along the way for that to reach its highest end. Then he goes in verse 3, he says, I will bless those who bless you. So, going and being a blessing is going to result in an encounter with others that allows for them to make a decision too. If they bless you, I'm going to bless them. So there's a multiplying effect that's going on here. The more that you are a blessing, then I am able to bless. They're in this thing together. And he says, I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt. So God has a place of provision in this relationship with Abram. It says, I'm not going to allow the curses. So who is this? Who was worried about being cursed before? Cain. Cain was worried about people coming against him. And so, the mark of Cain, you're going to be protected. Well, here we have it again. Only this is a whole new beginning from what Cain had had. Cain was receiving God's ministry of grace out of desperation. This is being offered and received as a gift. And so you can begin to see the whole thing. More than just the story shifting, everything about the way God is going about his business with us is or especially with Abram, is shifting.
Is this the beginning where even modern day believers say, you better watch out, God's going to curse you?
I think that it is.
I think that's the beginning. Because
Yeah.
Jesus goes on further and says,
Yeah.
I'll handle them. It's better to have a millstone thrown around their neck than what I'm going to do.
Right.
But I'm just thinking that's the first time you
And
hear the cursing from God.
Yeah.
It's like, if you mess with my kids, you messing with me.
Yeah. I think part of that comes at the end of Revelation too.
Yeah.
Where it says, don't add or take away from
Yeah.
this or you're going to be cursed.
Yeah.
And that was not an uncommon tag at the end of writings. But yeah, I think the idea that God is willing to curse,
Yeah.
and he makes it a part of his contractual arrangement with us, But it's a natural thing. If we're doing like God asks and we come to understand that he's our Father
Yeah.
and that he cares for
We'll
us,
obey.
accepting the fact that he's going to defend us becomes quite comforting.
Mm-hmm.
And for some, it's kind of a weird idea to think that God would be in the business of cursing.
But he's
providing
not.
for one.
He's giving you what you asked for.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Was that this
Yeah.
morning? Everything was together. Did you say
Yeah, I
that
talked a
this
little bit
morning?
about that this morning.
Yeah, because I was thinking
Yeah.
it was so. You want this. It's not that God's doing this to you.
Right.
You've asked for it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, when we wither on the vine, it's not that God has
he's
chosen
he's not the
for
fruit
that.
that's throwing you away.
Yeah, it's that we've become so diseased in our life that we're not retaining anything that Jesus is offering, and eventually we die from it, and that's a sad day for the vine dresser and for the vine.
Yeah.
All right, so
I got a thing real quick.
go ahead.
Pointing out that God's like cursing people, right? One thing I remember from class is that it's interesting how like that first line, it has, I will bless those who bless you. But the next line has, I will curse anyone, which is a
Yeah.
singular, right? It
Good
switches
point.
from like the plural, like there's a lot more people being blessed than cursed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
shows
cool.
God's nature, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
another thing, the one that says treat you with contempt,
Yes.
the word there is kolal, which means like to be light or like I guess unimportant, insignificant. So in this stem, it's like people who diminish Abraham are the ones that God's going to curse. If they like scorn him,
Yeah.
be like insignificant, right? Those are the ones that God's going to turn and curse.
Yep. And because God's name is attached to Abram now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're cursing
Yeah.
God.
So to
They're
diminish
cursing
Abram
Abraham.
is to
Yeah,
diminish God.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so even before we get to
I want to work with him till I die.
It's all class.
when we get to Moses and the Egyptians, it is a battle of the gods that are going on But here we have the same thing. It's this diminishing of God and what he's doing. He's in the business of restoration. Noah was the little restoration project. Now this is the big restoration project with Abraham.
Count the stars.
Yeah, that's right. And then the last part of that, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. So it goes from plural, singular, and then back to all. All the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Is there any qualifier for that? There's not any qualifier for that. It just says that all the people are going to be cursed. I mean, blessed. Sorry. And so we can look forward to Christ and know that is ultimately what's being spoken of here.
That's him right here. Jesus is coming.
Yeah. That's right. So that's that great forward looking, and we're able to say, well, what can that mean just for all the peoples of the earth to be blessed? It's a pretty broad and courageous statement to make by God, even that He's going to bless everybody through this man. That's just a man. So how's He going to do that? And of course, we have the long view back where we can see, because we know that Abraham never really reaches a place of accomplishing that, and neither does Isaac or Jacob and all the rest.
Walk by faith.
Yeah.
But we have the privilege of knowing, and still faith on our end, but we have the cross.
Yeah, we know so much more.
Than they do.
Yeah, and they just walk by faith.
And we're gonna be him a whole lot more because we do know so much.
Yeah. So that whole thing about to whom much is given, much is required. Our responsibility to God in carrying His name is even weightier than what Abraham lived. So I'm glad we went back and looked at some of that. That was good. So God said, and then in verse 4, Abram went. God said go, and Abram went. So you take those two lines and you see that everything in between will be achieved because Abram's willing to go. So it's a great statement of faith. God said go, and Abram went. And then we begin this great journey with Abram, where we begin to uncover just exactly how God is going to achieve everything that He's promised Abram. And it's not going to be easy on him. It's going to become very difficult, and we find that out almost right away when we get down to verse 12. But this is good. So Abram went as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. That's his nephew. Abram was 75 years old, which is middle age for him, when he left Haran, which is up in the Fertile Crescent. Nice green, plush area to live, and he left. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions that they had accumulated, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. So evidently, while they were in Haran, they took, either they acquired slaves, or in some sort of way he spoke of maybe that this whole thing is coming about because the God of the universe spoke to me. I don't know. We don't really have an idea what Abram knows about this, other than he knows that he is following, and that the voice that he is following we find is worthy of worship. Okay? He develops a sense of worship of God out of what God is saying to him. So that becomes important, I think, for us. So anyway, he leaves Haran with these people. His tribe's gotten bigger. For the land of Canaan. Well, they call it Canaan. This is, what do they call it when you know something and it's projected back? He didn't know he was going to Canaan.
Anachronism?
Is it an anachronism?
Like the author.
Like the author knows it's Canaan,
Yeah.
but Abram doesn't know it's
Right.
Canaan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the reader knows it's Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
But Abram didn't know where he was going. He was just going to the place that God told him.
Right.
And so he sets out for Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the site of Shechem, which is a town that is established much later. So we know that that's another one of those. At the oak of Morah. Morah means teacher. Interesting, right? So he comes to this place. He's at the oak of Morah.
So is that different than the Mara?
Like Mara, I think is bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
because isn't there somewhere else? Isn't there some Mara land? I mean, there's.
Yeah. Well, and they call it Ma'or in I'm trying to say it. The Seder service means bitter herbs.
But this is different.
Yeah.
This is a different place. We're at the teacher place.
This is the teacher. At the oak of teacher. So it's an important place to the Canaanites because they've named it, and so it must mean something special. So when God gets there, when Abram gets there, God teaches him. He shares something else with him here. He says, "To your offspring I will give this land." So now Abram's here. He's in the place where God's told him to go, and he hears from God and says, "Guess what? This isn't for you. It's for your offspring." This is the future that you're here looking at. And so it says from there, he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built an altar there to the Lord. And he called on the name of the Lord. So altars are for what? Remembering. Marking. Milestones. And at these places where there's milestones in remembering, he's calling out to God. He's hearing from God, and he's at least speaking of God. And that's what the commentators that I read about this say, that when he called on the name of the Lord, it's the sense of he is telling others about this experience that he's having now. So I've always thought of it as this is the place where he worshiped, and we first experience that worship with him, and it could be that, and also be that this is a very public declaration that is underway by Abram. So it's not this is not a private mystical thing where Abram's saying, "Oh, there's something in my spirit telling me this, and I'm going to keep it to myself and just continue on my way, keep my head down, blah blah blah." This is Abram responding to God in a very public and vocal way. And that's an important part of this whole affair, because here he is very public about everything, and then we're going to get to Egypt, and he's not so forthcoming about everything, and we begin to see that he works his way into relying upon other things other than God, which is naturally what we always glean from this Abram in Egypt section beginning in verse 10. So it says there was a famine in the land. So here's a big dun dun dun. There's a shift in what's going on in the story. Everything's going good. He's got a promise. He's building altars. He's worshiping, and then out of nowhere, dun dun dun. There's a famine in the land, and so Abram's got to deal with a famine. What does he do? He went down to Egypt to stay for a while. I'm not going to stay long. I'm just going to stay for a while. But up to this point, God has told Abram where to go. And now, God didn't tell him to go. But he said, "I think I'll go because I hear they got some good stuff. There's no famine in Egypt, and I'm going to go have a little bit of that." Okay, so...
And he didn't know at this point that God would feed you manna.
No, he's learning a lot of stuff. So he goes, he does this, and you can already see that
it's not going to turn out good.
It's not. You don't even get to the second clause of the sentence, and you know that it's going to go bad because God is not telling him to go, and he's already saying, "I'm going to stay." And nowhere in this has God told him to stay anywhere. He's just told him to, "You go where I tell you to go." So I'm going to go and I'm going to stay for a while because this is really a bad, severe famine. Okay. So the one that spoke all of this for him, we are reading this, and the assumption is, you mean Abram doesn't know that God can care for him through a famine? Well, he doesn't. And I can imagine if this is overwhelming side of the story, there's maybe hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more people in his little band.
The
that are dependent on him. He's got livestock. It's all that he has. Okay, he's accumulated this since he was a young man. He's 70-something years old. He could easily just watch everything die before his very eyes. So we get on him about this, but I think I'd have done the same thing. And besides, why didn't God just speak up? Okay, well, we're going to find why God doesn't do these things.
It's more of that faith law.
Yeah. See, we're always thinking, God should just speak up and say, wait a minute, it's going to be okay, I got this. So just hang out. Okay, but why doesn't God do that? And it is because there are these watershed moments in life where we have to decide on our own, like Harris so brilliantly pointed out a while ago, that when the text says that you got to get yourself up and go. I'm not going to herd you like cats, get you to go. You got to get yourself up and go. Abraham got himself up and went to Egypt without any direction from God at all. So when he's about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "Look, I know what a beautiful woman you are." He's sweet talking Sarai. No, he's not sweet talking her. He's stating the facts, but it's not going to help him. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife. They will kill me, but let you live." All right? So
there had to be some of that going on, or he would have never thought that.
This was a Bedouin thing. I started reading about this today, where this was not an uncommon thing.
Right.
And not only was it common for Bedouin tribes that met up with each other to take from one another, trading wives and children was currency. Mm-hmm. And so he's thinking, they may not want to trade. If I'm your husband, they'll kill me. But if I'm your brother, I'm blood kin. They have to deal with me for you. Yeah, isn't that messed up?
We come a long way.
Yeah. Now the other thing that's happening here, try to keep in mind the children of Israel and the Egypt story and Moses and the killing of the...
Yeah, I know, my mind's already way down there.
Yeah. See, here we have the little story that the writer gives us that grows into the big story later. It's just remarkable how I just see so much after reading Robert Alter's book.
Yeah.
This is where it just opened up so much of my eyes to this. So anyway, he says, when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. They will kill me and let you live. So please, he's asking her, please say that you're my sister, which in actuality, she was his half-sister. Okay? Yeah. Please say you're my sister, so it will go well for me because of you, and my life will be spared on your account. Now, all of a sudden, who's taking God's place in the relationship? Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, the wife. He has decided that she is going to possess the power when they get into Egypt. And the reason why is because of her God-given beauty. She didn't do anything to make herself beautiful. She's just beautiful. And he really doesn't. He didn't have to go out and look the world over for Sarai. He was in the same tent with his family. So all of this stuff just comes about, and he's saying, it'll go well for me because of you, and my life will be spared because of you. So now God's just kind of been moved completely out of this whole scene here. I've got somebody to take care of me now. We're going to be in Egypt. The grass is green. My animals are going to live. My family's going to be cared for, and my wife's going to keep me from getting killed. So when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Well, who wouldn't notice that? That's already been said twice, so it must be true. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, so the woman was taken to Pharaoh's household. He treated Abram well because of her, And Abram acquired, see, here we go. Abram acquired flocks and herds and male and female donkeys, male and female slaves and camels. Why? Because it's let's make a deal time.
Yeah.
Okay? You're wandering through, you need stuff, things die in the desert, you need extra. We're gonna buy.
When she came home after she spent the night in Pharaoh's house, whoo, he better enjoy all them donkeys and all.
Man.
You'll pay for it the rest of your life.
True.
Yeah. Well, and see, so the big backdrop picture is God's promise. What has He said? I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to have descendants as, I'm going to bless you. So how do you become a nation without a wife? I mean, he's childless. He has no children. He's got Lot. He's got Lot, but we'll see very early on here that Lot's a poor substitute. That's not going to work. And so he's kind of bargaining away what God has already told him. So God's out of the picture, and very slowly we see the promise dimming too, because of what has been chosen to do with Sarai. But then who comes in to save the day? God does.
Here comes nothing to do with the Calvary.
But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues. Okay, you see how we got the little mini story going on. Yeah. The Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues because of Abram's wife. Okay, so what has happened here is that Abram was supposed to provide, she's providing cover, sanctity for Abram's life, but in the process she brings disease and hardship upon innocent Egyptians. They've done nothing. Okay? But what does it take? What does God have to do to get a Pharaoh's attention? Evidently, you gotta let some plagues go. Yeah. So he had to get his attention about Sarai, and plagues were the only thing that is going to work. So Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" Now, how did he find out all this? We don't know. Maybe he went and asked Sarah. These things are happening since you came in the house. What's the deal? And she says, "Well, we kind of told a half-truth."
Well, he's like the other pharaohs. Does he have dream people too, probably?
Well, yeah.
You know that God they serve does those kind of things.
Right.
We don't know, like you said.
But we're left not knowing, and the writer's not interested in us knowing.
Right, that's not important.
The interesting part is Pharaoh knows the truth while Abram is still trying to convince him of this lie. So this is the way God does. He reveals the truth. Okay? Even when we're in the midst of trying to cover with a lie, God, the truth will find you out. It's my wife's favorite line. The truth will find you out. Okay. Yeah, it will set you free. So he says, "Why did you say she's my sister? So that I took her as my wife." So he knows that he's treading in this terrible place, because now trading for your sister is an honorable thing. But taking somebody's wife is very shameful. Okay? It would have been better for Pharaoh to take Abram's life and to set Sarai free of Abram so that he could have Sarai. That would have been the better arrangement for Pharaoh, but not for Abram.
They did when they knew they were wives.
That's right.
But when it was a sister,
that's right.
It was a bargain with you.
So it turns out that Pharaoh has more integrity than Abram at this point in this particular episode, because his reputation is at stake for the whole system of honor and shame that does exist for his culture. So he says, "Now here is your wife." He sets the whole thing straight. "Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave his men orders about him, and they sent him away with his wife and all he had. So there's no bargaining back. There's no Indian giving from Pharaoh about everything that he had already given Abram.
Everything, including her, get out of
Yeah,
here.
get out of here. You bring destruction and disease upon my house.
The Hebrew is kind of funny. It's literally And now, behold, your wife. Take her and go.
Yeah, behold.
She is your wife.
Yeah, you see, she is your wife. So it's so we have these things where the writer wants us to begin to think. All right, Abram is escaping a famine, and he brings disease. Not because of any famine, he brings disease because he is misrepresenting. He ends up misrepresenting God because he's not relying upon God. So there's a misrepresentation of God, and it is God that comes to Pharaoh to set it right. So Abram's missed his opportunity to declare Yahweh to the Pharaoh. Yahweh has to come and declare himself to Pharaoh by means of these plagues. Because for Abram's ears are turned to God and he hears. Pharaoh's ears are turned to his God, and the only way God can get his attention is to bring about destruction. So here's the lesson. We wonder sometimes why God has to deal so hard with us sometimes to get our attention so that he can do a good thing or to save us from ourselves. And it is because too often we tend to just have our ears turned to other things. Pharaoh had his ear turned to other gods, and God had to snap him out of it, so to speak, and get his attention. So, in the midst of that story, Abram shows little faith. He creates hardship where there was none before. When he was escaping hardship, he brings it with him because of his falsehood. Sarai is elevated to the place of Savior in his life, and ultimately is giving back, and it actually brings shame upon Abram in the process because he's been caught on his lie. Everything's just kind of been pulled apart. The only gain out of anything that's happened here is that Abram's wound up with a few more slaves and a few more donkeys and a few more camels that are at risk now because he's got to leave Egypt, and the rest of the world is in a famine. So nothing's good when we come to this place, okay?
There is something to be said about the fact that he leaves this place and plunders it, right? In a sense, you think of in the Passover, right? When they leave, they take gold necklaces. They take all the food.
That's right.
They receive. They not only get to go free, but they also get the riches of the land.
Right.
So there's something to be said about that. But
yeah, it's the same. It's the parallels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that we see in that. But we don't see God as saying this is the blessing.
That's true.
This is provision. This is Pharaoh acting in good faith, and he's not going to dishonor himself by saying, I want my stuff back. Okay. Really, and in a sense, what would that say about Sarai? At that point, she really is only property. And he's already stated how beautiful she is. Well, he hasn't, but his servants have. There's some level of agreement there. He took her. So, yeah, so Sarai becomes, she's the least damaged out of all of this. It's Pharaoh, of course, and then Abram, because he's finding himself, he's in a, as Blackaby says, he's in a crisis of belief here. I've created this crisis of belief now, and what am I going to do? So he leaves and takes with him all he had. So we'll get into 13 a little bit here. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev. This is a high desert. When we look back, let me look back to, is it in chapter 11? Yep. He built an altar there and he called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram journeyed by stages to the Negev. This is a desolate place that he's at. He leaves Egypt and he goes back to this desolate place. He, his wife, and all he had, they throw that in like it's a person and all he had, and Lot with him. Yeah, well, it's fixing to fall in line why he's last. He breaks away, and so he's mentioned last to kind of give us a hint as to what about to happen. Yeah,
yep.
That's exactly what that is. I'm learning to read this book after all my life. I'm finally learning how to read it. So it says, Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built the altar, and Abram called on the name of the Lord there. So here we have a repeat. He's back. It's like, I need a reset, God. I've done this thing, and now it's almost like he retraces his steps and gets all the way back to Bethel where he knows that he can meet God and call on God. And so that's what he does.
Isn't that what we do? We look back at where last time, God blessed us or helped us, and we,
Yeah. Well, remember last week I was talking about the milestones, the poles that they put on the Continental Divide, so that you can see where the trail is.
So you can find your way.
Yeah, so I could find it. Well, I got lost that time, and I couldn't until I got up on the top, and I found the milestone, and then I'll begin to recognize. I got lost, and I began to recognize landmarks. She don't know how many times I did. I haven't told her all those stories.
Whenever I hear like Dad in Bible study, he always has a new "I almost died" story. Like,
well, this wasn't an almost died story. I just got lost.
Well, so that's not like just like an extreme. Like, oh yeah, one time I did this thing that no one has ever done.
Well, no, it's not. I mean, I'm sure plenty of people got lost.
Yeah,
Look,
one time I
hear
hears
it that way, but that's not exactly. Since God had a call, he was like, now my son, he's one that almost died much time.
the point is, once you're back at the milestone, you can find your way, and you work your way back to where you started.
Exactly.
Well, that's what Abram's doing here. He's working his way back to that place.
That's why he found the Continental Divide.
Yeah. So he goes back, and it says, now Lot, and there's one of those phrases that the writer often uses to transition. There's something new coming. Now Lot, and this is a kind of a new section, was traveling with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land was able to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together. So they've become a plague of locusts everywhere they went. There's too many of them. They were destroying the landscape and the ecosystem, and they couldn't stay together. And they were fighting each other over water and grass, and it was just a bad scene. They were quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. Parenthetically, it's presented to us. So, saying that this two things, or at least two things, their argument is not going unnoticed. Okay, there's a fight that's going on, and it's not going unnoticed. And also, this is a huge group of people, and so the land, all of a sudden, the neighborhood is shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller. There's all these people, and so something's got to be done.
You're between two cities, and they're both kind of like, "Hey, what's going on?"
Yeah, what's going on here? Yeah. And we've already seen the problem of gathering up together when God hasn't called for it. And so we've got some repeating ideas that are going on here. And so Abram said to Lot, please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen or my herdsmen, since we're relatives. So the quarreling seems to say it would be okay if we weren't related, but we're related. So we don't want to alienate one another because of this. So isn't the whole land before you? So imagine they're sitting up on the Negev, and it's kind of a high plain over the Levant, right? And they can see.
As far as the eye can see.
Yeah, and you see everything. He says, and God's already said it's all yours. He's already showed them that at Bethel, which is on the other, they could be on the same side, but they've already shown him the whole thing. So is it the whole land before you? So separate from me. If I go to the left, if you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Seems to be a simple solution. So, Lot looked out and saw the entire plain of the Jordan, as far as Zoar, and was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden in the land and the land of Egypt. So here we have the imagery. Lot looks out and he's looking at life-giving land, where the water's there, just like the river of life that comes out of the garden, or the Nile that was in Egypt that watered everything. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Kind of we've seen the selfishness of Abram at work, okay, and now we're seeing the selfishness of Lot at work. So every time they do something for themselves, by themselves, it creates problems, which we will see. Abram had his problems. Lot's going to have his problems. Okay? Because the other thing about this whole episode is God hasn't yet spoken that if this is a good idea or not. Can God provide even in the midst of arguing and quarreling and all these things that are going on? He's never given a chance. They just decide they're going to do it this way, and it doesn't turn out for Lot later. And also, Abram finds himself having to intervene in ways, but we see a change there that we'll get to probably next week. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, but Lot lived in the cities on the plain and set up his tent near Sodom. So we have these two ideas forming. Abram is a man of the wilderness. Okay, he's going to settle there. So he kind of becomes the lone sojourner by himself, taking care of his family. And he really is in a place that if you're going to make it, God's going to have to provide. And then here's Lot. He goes to the city, and there's more opportunity to trade. It's in the valley of the Jordan. There's a lot of stuff going on that's better in the city from his point of view. Now, the parentheses in verse 13 is this. Now the men of Sodom were evil, sinning immensely against the Lord. All right.
That would be
So the parenthetical statement here is Lot made the best choice for himself so that he would be cared for by the land, but the people in the land are no different than the ones that were destroyed by the flood. Okay, they're sinning immensely before God. So what Lot has done, he's looked at the world through his eyes and stepped into chaos, is what he's done, which is sin. He's just stepping into chaos. And then what does Abram goes to the west, and there's no commentary about where Abram is other than we know that it is part of the Negev, it's part of the desert. So after Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are, look north, south, east, and west. So he's sitting up high plain at Bethel.
And he's God speaking again.
And God's speaking again. Okay? So when God speaks, things are going well for Abram. Abram's living life, and it's kind of a tune-in that he's in cooperation in some sense with God, or at least he's not viewing things egocentrically anymore like he was in Egypt. He's looking at things and he says, you know what, I'm going to give Lot the choice. I'll take what's left. Maybe the thinking is God will provide. And so God does say to him, look, from the place where you are, look north, south, east, and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. So ultimately, does Abram take possession of any land?
Not yet.
Just the piece that he buys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, it's real close to here.
Yeah.
Not exactly on this spot, but it's really close to here. So now God is connecting. If it's for Abraham and Abraham's offspring, and Abraham is God's man, and God's name is connected with Abraham's, we're kind of building a bridge to these other generations in a more direct way. At least that's how I read it. I may be wrong. Not a lot of commentary about it. But there's got to be a reason why all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but God makes these statements that connect possession with Abraham and his offspring. And I think it has to do with God's name.
And so do you think this, this is the verse where nations and politics are fighting over who's taking land from Israel, Palestine?
Yes.
This is it as far as they can see. So we're going to fight to do this. Come back and says, this is what I said.
That's exactly, yep.
Yeah.
And they will fight.
And I think I told you this before, Brother Tony Perkins, who's big in all the
Oh, yeah.
stuff. He will go through history and show you every time the United States has been part of messing with the land, look what happens to our country. And
Yeah.
he'll go right down the name of it when there's been presidents who've done things against Israel.
Wow.
We've had a hurricane, we've had a flood, we've had this. Every time we do it, he said, you touch not that land that God said belonged to you.
Yeah.
Even today. And I'm like,
Yeah.
That's pretty deep. So every time I read that, I'm like, okay, that's where it started. This is your land. This land is your land.
Yeah.
This is your land. It's my land.
And he has every intention of what am I trying to say? To communicate his intentions even now through it.
Yeah.
Now we know that we're the new Israel,
Mm-hmm.
but for some, the lesson still must be learned with boots in the dirt. Living in the place, having that reality. I'm thankful it's not a reality for us. That our reality with God is found in our faith.
Cross, but even those over there who still think, and they're still, which is our job, still tell them about Jesus.
Right,
They're still looking,
right.
In my mind, they're looking for Jesus. He's already come. You just missed him.
Right. Yeah, the Messiah is a real idea. Yeah. So he goes on, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So I can imagine there's Abram, and he's sitting there by the altar he built at Bethel, and he's got this handful of dirt that he's just watching fall out of his hand. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring could be counted. So there's no determining just how vast your nation will be. So he says, get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So he's telling him now, get up and go. Get up and walk around and see what's up. Yeah. So Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Okay, so what's Mamre mean? I think it's listening. Come on, Harris, help me out.
Sorry, what's up?
Mamre, what's it mean?
What's your Hebrew notes?
I feel like it's just a name. I'll look at it. I feel like it has something to do with Mora still.
Yeah, something about teaching and listening.
Oh, really?
I think it has something to do with listening.
So Mora's teaching and Mamre's listening.
Yeah.
Let's do a word search.
Sounds like that would work.
Where did I'm trying to remember where I read that. And golly, there's no note at the end of that.
According to Kohlenberg Mounts, we've got strength as a possible meaning. It has a question mark behind it.
Okay.
Lusty. That's weird, but
That is weird.
yeah. So
I'm thinking I got that from something I read or listened to on the Bible Project, that it's something about, but that may have been more and listening and teaching. I don't remember. There's got to be something more to it because it occurs too many times.
Yeah.
What is on that Hebrew up there on your sidebar?
Oh, this over here?
Yeah, is that just
Well, that's the
saying-
word there, and it's not giving me
It's just showing.
It just
how
says it's a
spelled
place,
written or whatever,
a
yeah.
place. There's a derivative of it that to feed on the fat of the land to graze. But I am really remembering something else
I like the
about
idea
that.
of teaching and listening. we making our own.
I'm sad now that I can't remember. Let's see. It just talks about it being a place.
Yeah.
But names mean so much throughout this whole thing that it's hard to just skirt by one because he comes back to it later, like he does.
Yeah, he actually.
And at one place, what happens? Something happens significant the next time he's at Mamre.
You know, he aligned makes an alliance with some like actual Canaanites that are. You know what? I think Mamre is a person. In one part, in like names him as a person.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, we're missing something. We're missing.
I can't remember which part it is. But.
I want to look it up. Anyway, we'll come back to it next week because we're at the end of that and almost to 14. So we'll just save 14 to next week. Yeah. So. I'm going to end that stream. See you
Goodbye,
later.
stream.
Goodbye, stream.